live. So, all right. Thank you all for being here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about why still take an English course. Oh, wait. It says it's got a countdown. I don't know if the countdown means we're actually live or if we will be live or we've been live that long. Anyway, I'm going to proceed. Okay, Elizabeth says we're live. All right. So maybe we edit that out later. All right. So talking a little bit today about kind of marketable skills in relation to English classes. I talked about this with my class, and much of what I'm going to talk about is derived from what they told me. So, and then of course my own thinking on this. All right, so I'm going to share a document so we can kind of get down with this. I won't be able to see anybody when I'm in the document, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to flip in and out of here enough to be able to see what's going on. All right. Hey, students, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I knew y'all wouldn't let me down. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right. So from what I know, it's showing y'all this thing right now. So this was a discussion that we had in class. Why still take an English course, or why take an English course at this point? I mean, we talked about certainly high school should have prepared our students for where they need to go in the work world, but most all of us recognize that it wasn't quite enough. High school English wasn't quite enough, and so we still have to take an English course. And so that's kind of how I put the thing together: is why do we still have to take an English course? And the premise was that it's useful in terms of career and marketable skills. And we say marketable skills, what we're talking about is those things that make us employable. So the skills that we acquire in college, in classes, to make us employable and marketable out there in the work world. That's not the only reason we take English courses or any courses at school, but that is one. If we don't recognize that one of the aims of education is employability, then we've kind of missed the mark. All right, well, two of the things that I was charged with talking about were kind of two of our learning outcomes that are on the 1301 syllabus. One is developing ideas with appropriate support and attribution. That also means documentation for us, and then also the use of American edited English and academic essays. Obviously, in the work world, it's not really about the academic essays, but still the use of edited American English, and we can talk about what that is in just a second. But the first thing I did was, oh, I hear some noise out there. Okay, all right. The first thing I did was do a little Google search on my own just to see what was out there, what it said employers wanted, just to kind of frame the conversation. And so just on this first little bullets of what's out there, critical thinking and problem solving were kind of some of the first things. And that's definitely one of the things that we are looking at inside of the English classroom. Teamwork and collaboration. Funny enough, we just finished those collaboration projects in my class. And then strong ethic and professionalism, oral and written communication skills, and leadership. You'll notice kind of both lists of those say the same thing. So that would indicate to me that there is some truthfulness to that, but there would be other things we could look at. But just as a general starting point, the very skills that we are discussing in this video is exactly what communication is, exactly the skills that employers are looking for. So then we must be onto something if that's the case. So I'm going to flip back over to my document. And kind of the large way that I've framed this up of thinking about these attribution and this edited American English is that these are expectations that employers have in their fields and that we have of the fields that we're trying to get into. And to not adequately prepare for those leaves us somewhat ill-prepared to join the work world. We talked about this in class, a little bit, this edited American English thing. And largely what the students came down to, what they told me was, and this was based on what the 511 class just told me last week, was that mostly when we have to kind of address our language register, it's how we want to be perceived. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, so that using edited American English is more of a perception thing than anything else. So what is this edited American English? It's not something we typically talk about. We talk about it on the syllabus, but it's not the way we kind of talk about it in the world. When we talk about it in the world, we kind of say like maybe standard English or something like that. But in general, I put up a definition that I found here. So edited American English is the version of language that has come to the standard for public discourse, for newspapers, books, and for most of the writing you do. So very much looking at the writing side of this. So it's not just what we do for in school, but it's also on the job. And that was from this site here, which I tried to properly put on a works cited and then do a good citation so that my students know that I could do it also. All right, so edited American English is really kind of written language, written English for academic purposes and for on-the-job purposes. So I think that's important to keep in mind on this aspect of it, is that it's the written portion. That doesn't mean that it doesn't hold over into our speaking, but it's specifically for the written part. All right, I'm gonna roll a little bit more. One of the questions that I think has to come naturally from this discussion of using this kind of standardized English is why use it? And so this is my comment down here on my own thing here, that it's interesting, but what my students told me was, and what by and large what's out there on the internet says, the reason we use this is we want to sound professional. I think that's an okay thing to think, but it also helps us to sound intelligent. I think that's okay also. But I found both of those ideas interesting, that was what the purpose of standard English out there was. But of course, there's a problem that comes along with that, and I kind of highlight that in the next little bullet here, that, yeah, standard English is an accepted form and convention of writing that attempts to cut through discussions about correct English. But of course, obviously, anything that tries to cut through something, by the virtue of it tearing through that, it leaves some of these discussions on the floor. And this discussion right now is important about who gets to own the language, who gets to say what correct English is, who gets to say how we use it. I was talking to my dean, my chair, about this. I said, look, this could come across very racialized. And we said that was okay that we said it came across as racialized, and it was okay that we don't have an answer, because we're working on this at this moment, at this time in history, trying to figure out who does get to use the language. How do they get to use it? How do they get to assign what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? I don't have an answer for that. All I can tell you is at the moment, the way we're using standardized English is to kind of try to attempt our best attempt at being understood in a world where we know writing, it is intended for an audience, but can also go other places. So we don't know what the audience is, and so our best shot at being understood is to use kind of a common base level of language that at least we believe will do its best job of trying to help people understand where we are. The other part of that is the perception part. So we desire to be understood, so we're going to use kind of this standardized language approach. May not be perfect. We're working through that. But our desire is to be understood, and be understood kind of how we desire to be perceived. When we go to job interviews and careers, we're hoping to be perceived. And so I would ask you all to think about this. This is some of the discussion we had in class. I asked my students, do y'all talk the same to me as you do to your peers? And they said, no, absolutely not. Not the same at all. And so I wondered about that a little bit. And so just so you know, students, I'm going to ask you about that here in just a second. Why is it not the same? But then I extended that conversation a little bit more, is I wanted people to reflect on if they were going to talk about their new love interest to their grandmother or some elderly family member, it would probably be radically different than the discussion they would have with their youngest family member. Talking to grandma, they're going to definitely aim at the register of respect when they discuss that with their grandma. But when they discuss it with someone younger to them, they are no longer trying to respect someone. They do want to respect their person, their audience, the little one, but they're also trying to make themselves be respectable. And so I think there's kind of two different things going on there, but it's about that perception. How do you want to be perceived? Let me see what else I said there. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to stop for a second, get out of this dadgum thing so I can see people. Again, I'm going to back over my StreamYard here. And So like I can see Andrew, Malena, John, Chad, and Riley. Um, I'm going to ask you again. So it goes on the record here. Do you talk the same with me as your professor that you do with your peers? And I want you I want you to mic up so we can hear you back. And so Andrew, is it the case that you talk different with me?
Yes. Yeah.
Why, Andrew? Why would you do that?
I believe it's better to be perceived differently between two different audiences. Like one, let's say your peers, you're hanging out, let's say on a Saturday afternoon, you're out at the movies, having fun, goofing off, whatnot. And you want to be perceived as someone enjoyable to be hanged out with. And then when you're in a classroom setting, you're like, okay, well, I want to be seen as someone responsible, someone mature. I want to be seen as a good student, someone who can actually be relied upon to listen and participate.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Riley, is it true that you talk different to me? I mean, Riley, I want you to be authentic. Why won't you be authentic and talk normal to me?
Well, it is being authentic, but it's also about who you are trying to be and the professionalism in that. And it's the respect, like you said, in different areas. So the respect you share teacher to student is different than the respect friend to friend.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. All right, I'm going to go left to right. Malena, we talk. Come on, Malena. You talk different to me than you do to your colleagues back there in the back row. Can you mic up and answer me, Malena?
Yeah, I think it's just because of the professional setting, as Riley said, just because it's like a different setting. Like at home, it's just more chill, but at school, you're doing something more professional.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Melania, to start to think of school as the kind of start of that professionalism, and you kind of have to start to adjust that. Nice point. John, come on.
Okay,
Lay it on me.
So yeah, I do talk differently with you and my friends. It's like, honestly, you're a cool guy, but you're a teacher. I'm a student, we got to keep it professional in the classroom. I don't want to overstep my boundaries. Like if I were to say something to my friends, what if I might not be able to say that to you? It's something different, something that we didn't share the same experience. We may not have the same sense of humor, all that. So we got to keep it professional.
Yeah, good point, John. I like that idea of boundaries. It does establish boundaries. I don't want to go too far, and you don't want to go too far. Nice point, Chad.
I think it's kind of like how we're expected from, like, I guess, a professor, just how, like, just the environment, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a fine answer, Chad. Yeah. All right. I'm going to flip back over my document. Y'all could see the document, right? I wasn't just talking to it. Okay, just making sure. All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to flip back over. Hey, Danielle, you're here. Let me ask you, do you talk differently? Danielle is a colleague of mine, a professor also. Danielle, is it true that you kind of adjust your register to different audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually thinking, kind of bouncing off of all of these ideas that you guys are bringing into the conversation. I would say that we address our students in a way that's different from the way that we address our colleagues in, say, an informal meeting or after a department meeting, even though we're technically doing it that we're engaging in that sort of conversation in the same setting, because we have different goals for those conversations.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. So one of the last thing I'll say about this is one of the students in one of the other classes pointed out it has to do with the identity hat that we're putting on at the moment, who we are at that moment. When I'm professor, I definitely try to dress it up for y'all. When I'm the guy at the grocery store, I try to take it down a register because professor doesn't play as well at the being bagged up groceries and having to step in and do stuff there. All right, good. All right, I'm gonna flip back over my document. All right, so I do think there's something about that respectfulness here. And then I took some stuff here. How do we use it? So like we can talk all the live long day about that, about using English that way. How do we use it? The easiest is being audience aware. but that's kind of a slippery thing to say. So audience aware, it means considering your audience. It means kind of figuring out what do they know about the subject. It also goes down to the next one. How do they feel about the topic under the hand? And what new information can you provide, and what's your relation to the audience? And I think relationship to the audience, I think that's kind of where y'all were hitting a minute ago, is in that audience awareness. The relationships are different, the identities are different, and therefore we have to adjust that. And I would go the other way and say, there is much at stake if we are unable or unwilling to adjust that register, that tone, that use of our English or use of our language, because we may come off as more pompous than we want to be, or we may come off too lowbrow. I've definitely been in both of those places where I didn't adjust appropriately at the beginning, but then later did. The other part that we can consider there is the message. The thing we're actually talking about itself is the message. What's the thing I'm trying to share with them? Yeah, they may know something about it, but what am I going to do there? How am I going to talk with them? So what is the message? Is it a piece of information I just need to relate, or is it a question I have? So I think that all deals with what that message looks like. And then the argument and the content. Is it an argument? Is it just informative? Am I trying to persuade someone to do something? Am I just laying out a process of something? I think those all matter. Word choice, that's definitely what it comes down to, is the word choice. Do we use our street cred, our street language, that informal stuff? Do we use our texting language? Or do we dress it up a little bit? Do we use our formal language? I think we go back and forth in this writing voice and this speaking voice, and the one does inform the other. And sometimes that writing voice trickles up, and sometimes that speaking voice trickles up. But if we're not aware of that, then I think we kind of undermine our very act of communication and that perception we're trying to get to. Also in the sentence type and length, I was thinking about this as I was up at the elementary school the other day doing something, and long sentences would have undermined what I was trying to do with the kiddos up there. So I think it's also important that the length of sentence, the length of idea that we're trying to get across is also important to that message, to that audience. And then the tone. My students know I'm kind of jokey, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But that tone is for me to hit that register where they can tell that I'm serious about something, but I don't want to take it too serious because then we can't get anything done. This last little bit, when and where to use it. I don't want to undermine this, but we're doing this all the time. The explanation that I've talked about is when we are outside of it. Let's say we all as a group went to see a movie and we were standing outside the movie theater after having seen the movie. We want to discuss it. We are going to couch the way we talk about that movie in the terms of whether we liked it or disliked it, and whether we're going to hit that higher register of I have a very good an intelligent reason why I like that movie, or I have some kind of pedestrian, I don't like it because they use too much red in the movie. At the end, though, this thing is about the perception that we have, or that we're trying to get out there across, so that we can be viewed in a certain way. And that's what the 1301, 1302 classes were relaying to me, is it's how you want to be perceived. And I think they're on the money on that one. Now, this next bit, it's a little drier. So the next part I'm supposed to talk about is the attribution and documentation of sources. And so while the first one is about perception, so what this is a way at getting at the use of material that's not yours, but that you don't have time to get permission for it. Ideally, in a perfect world, when we went to use someone else's material, we would ask their permission, they would give permission, and away we would go. But that's not the world that we live in. And so trying to get permission for those things is difficult. This is a way to get permission, to get it allowed to be able to use this stuff and used appropriately. So the first part here is when it says attribution, I want to make the distinction between attribution and documentation. The attribution part is just making sure that the source, the author, has been given credit and then demonstrated and written, usually just right into the text. The documentation side is kind of the convention we've adopted to make sure that happens on some kind of regular basis. So when we talk about it, it's MLA, the Modern Language Association. They've come out with a style, and we use that style. And it deals with making sure that you've documented in there and that you have quotations for your sources and citations on a works cited page. we know those three things go together. But both of these, attribution and documentation, work together. You can separate them out as kind of two separate identities and things that we're doing, but most of the time we link them together, especially as it pertains to this stuff. So before I break into this more, I want to go back over and talk a little bit with the students again. So we've talked about this, obviously. We've talked about attribution and documentation extensively. That's one of the things we've worked on training the whole semester. But to y'all's understanding, why is it important to document? This time I'm going to start, I'll start at the bottom, start with Riley down here at the bottom, and I'll work my way back up. So Riley, tell me about attribution and documentation. Why do you conceive that as important?
Well, when we talked about it in class, I brought up the research aspect. If your job pertains to that, you would have to have that experience or create the on-job experience of that sourcing. But also you brought up, and I agree with, it's about decision making, and it's about where you take your sources from and how you gather information just to go about your day. And I related that also in class to politics and vote for, and it's just how you base the information yourself.
Yeah, I think you're right, Riley. Malena, what can you add to that?
I would add to that, like, probably like future jobs where like you have to document everything. You have to actually like put sources in there, and like it can reflect on later on.
Yeah. Quincy, I see you're there. Can you mic up and talk to us, or is your mic not working?
Yeah, my mic's working. The reason why I feel that attribution is important to writing is, one, that's what you're talking about, and you're not just stealing someone else's idea. And being able to document it correctly shows you like you're that much more knowledgeable about what you're going off of.
Okay, that's good, Quincy. Yeah, so one of the things we saw early on when I did that search was one of the things that employers are looking for is credibility. They're looking for people to make ethical decisions. And this documentation gets right at that. We want to be seen as credible, so we have to act credible. So John, what can you add to that conversation?
So either way, no matter what career interest you're going to go into, you're going to have to document everything. Like, say I'm a business major, I have a good idea. I want to make sure that I get information from reliable sources. And if something goes wrong in my idea, I want to be able to backtrack to see where I went wrong and then how to fix it.
Boom. I love that, John. That's exactly right. When we document sources, we can track it back. And I think that's really important, especially in this fast moving informational world. Chad, anything you can append with that?
Darn. I mean, mostly everyone has like said what, kind of what I was going to say, with like how it needs to be credible, how every like job needs like to have like documentation, and mostly just how like our world has kind of like evolved to like more documentation.
No, yeah, I think you're right. That it's a litigious world out there, meaning you've got to watch your steps out there, or you could get yourself in hot water pretty fast. Mm-hmm. We don't so much think about plagiarism in the work world, but it definitely does happen. Andrew, anything else you can add to this?
Not too much. I will say I was going to forward the opinion of John and Riley a little bit. But it's really like what they've been saying, it's about that credibility, that authenticity of how you approach the work world and how you respect other people's work. It's important to make sure that you can look back on certain information, review it, revise it, and whatnot.
Okay, awesome. All right, I'm going to go flip back over to my document. see if I can get a little further along. I don't want this thing to be too long that we're doing here. So why to do it? Well, y'all all pretty much gave good reasons for it. I wrote up some kind of more formalized reasons here. Attribution or signal phrase, kind of making sure we've given credit. We do that right in the paper. Instead of kind of doing a footnote or something like that, it's best to do it right there in the paper so that we are not left with kind of, where did that idea come from? The other one, and we talked a lot about this, and especially in the way that we handle stuff in the class, is it clearly establishes whose ideas are whose. If we put the quote in there, we put the citation in there, then it's really clear. If we do the paraphrase where we make clear whose idea it was, that also does it also so that we can see, this is Robert's idea and this is Riley's idea, and those two things are separate. The other thing is that professors and probably your employers would want to know whose idea am I looking at. And therefore, you want to make sure if it's your idea, that it's clear that it's your idea. Now, you may have some supporting evidence, and that's most often how we use those quotes, but we want y'all's ideas, your thinking, to be clear and distinctive. That is the stuff that's going to make you advanceable in any job that's going on, is that they can see, hey, this person makes good decisions. They're a critical thinker. They can handle the problems. They can probably handle more, and so we can advance them. People who document well are typically those who understand these conventions. All right. Reasons for it. Documentation tells your reader where they also can go to get the material themselves. That's super important. We often in the professors, we follow back to see, is that really what it says there? Because if that's the case, that's a really good idea. That's important. So we want to be able to follow back, and that's a good idea. And just giving credit to the authors. All right. So next, in terms of English class, we use MLA, but every discipline uses something a little different. In academics, there are some well-known styles, Chicago style for one, or APA, and different fields use different stuff. But as far as the work world goes, I'm not sure that they exactly use our documentation style that we do in academics, but I will guarantee you there is a documentation style that they want used in whatever documental reporting you're doing, and they're going to teach you that. But if you know one of these styles, doing that makes it easier to understand because you're not starting from scratch. Next little bit here. And if you need to understand that better, you need to ask your professor which style our field uses. All right, so basic stuff here. I was thinking about kind of how this all goes together. I started writing a bunch of stuff there. I don't think we should go over that, so I'm going to move on down here. Just how this works is introduce the quote. We know this, and I've kind of done this with my class, so I'm going to lay it out here. We can go pretty quick here. When we talk about the quotes, we want to introduce it. That's going to give the attribution clues about who's talking, what they're talking about, and why it's important. And so that's what I've done here in this example right here, is we want to make sure that we are introducing material appropriately. So we want to tell who's talking, what they're talking about. Give us those context clues, get that attribution out there early. The next part is the quote itself, and we put that quote directly in quotation marks, so that we know that's precisely the thing. If we have to change some stuff, there are some rules down there for ellipses and brackets, but we don't have to go over that right this second. But there are some rules to append or change these things if we need to make them do what we need them to do when we're using them for support inside of our documents. The last thing is we cite it. And so then that citation usually includes the author's last name, if we have it, and then the page number. If we don't, then we use that kind of first information that's on the works cited. But I want y'all to remember, citations, works cited, attribution works together. There is the introduction of the quote itself, and then the citation. Those three things are important. They go together to triad. And then ultimately, all that does is lead us down to the works cited, which would help us understand what we're trying to get from that. So the works cited is that list of entries on the bibliography that shows us where the material came from. So these three things, the quote, the introduction of the quote itself, and the citation drives down that works cited. Those pieces work together. I talked a little bit about paraphrase here and summarize, but I'm not sure that that's germane to our discussion now. So let's see. Those were kind of the things that I wanted to talk about. Anything else as far as like the stuff that we've talked about in class? Is there anything else that we've talked about in class regards to that that y'all can remind me of? Andrew, Chad, Malena, Quincy, John, Riley. I see Kirsten's here now. Anything else that we've said that would be important for us to relay kind of to future 1301 students? Can I think of anything?
What was the question again? What are we reminding them?
So we're kind of winding up here, and I'm trying to think, is there anything else we said about kind of documentation or attribution that we think is important to kind of put out there for our future 1301 friends?
Well, I would like to add, you can kind of attribute it to history and the future history. And if we don't do the English correctly now, it could potentially be incorrect and then you base off that and what we teach, and just it's a snowballing effect for historical purposes.
That's a really good point. If we don't document, we stand the chance of ultimately being on the wrong side of history by not having documented where did that idea come from, and then we have kind of undermined the very thing we were trying to do, which was put an idea out there that people could respond to. That's a great place to stop, Riley. I think you have hit it on the head that we kind of have to document that stuff so that we can come back to it later and remember it appropriately and where those ideas came from. All right, so that's probably pretty much the end of where we want to get to on this thing. So I hope we answered kind of why to take an English class, because we're going to learn these skills. And I hope we answered why this kind of edited American English is still important. And I hope we answered about this documentation. If not, I look forward to seeing you in 1301 class where we can go further into that and figure the rest of that out. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you for being here with me. I really, really appreciate it.